What if everything you see above ground at Giza is just a fraction of what really exists? What if the pyramids are not the pinnacle of ancient Egyptian civilization, but merely markers, pointing to something far more profound hidden beneath the sand? What if the greatest archaeological discovery in human history is not waiting to be found, but waiting to be acknowledged, waiting for permission to be revealed? This is not speculation. This is not fantasy. In March 2025, Italian researchers announced the discovery of massive underground structures beneath the Khafre Pyramid, structures extending 2,000 feet into the earth, structures that should not exist according to everything we have been taught about ancient Egypt. The world reacted with excitement, with curiosity, with questions that demanded answers. But the Egyptian antiquities establishment reacted differently. Dr. Zahi Hawass, the most powerful archaeologist in Egypt, dismissed the findings immediately, calling them false news, calling them fabrication spread by people who lack knowledge of Egyptian civilization. He did not debate the evidence. He did not question the methodology. He simply declared the findings invalid and moved on, as if scientific discovery could be erased by official pronouncement. This pattern is not new. For more than a century, anyone who discovers evidence of underground structures at Giza faces the same wall of silence, the same official denial, the same bureaucratic obstruction. Excavation permits are revoked. Research funding disappears. Academic careers end. And the structures beneath Giza remain hidden, protected not by sand or stone, but by something far more impenetrable, official secrecy maintained across generations, across governments, across political revolutions that changed everything above ground while leaving the underground mysteries untouched. The story begins not in 2025, but in 450 BC, when Herodotus, the father of history, stood in the shadow of the Great Pyramid and listened to Egyptian priests describe something that would haunt archaeology for 24 centuries. They told him about an underground labyrinth, a network of chambers and tunnels carved deep beneath the plateau, extending for miles in every direction. They described 3,000 rooms, half above ground and half below, connected by passages that wound through bedrock like the branches of a subterranean tree. Herodotus recorded every detail with the precision of a reporter, noting that he was permitted to see only the upper level, that the lower chambers were forbidden, guarded, kept secret even from foreign visitors with official permission. For 2,400 years, scholars dismissed his account as myth, as legend, as the gullible recording of priestly exaggerations. No archaeological evidence supported it. No other ancient writer mentioned it. No excavation found anything resembling what Herodotus described. His reputation suffered. The story became a footnote in the history of ancient misconceptions, a cautionary tale about believing too easily, about confusing stories with reality. Until the summer of 1999, when Dr. Zahi Hawass, the same man who would later dismiss the 2025 findings, made a decision that validated Herodotus and opened questions that remain unanswered today. Beneath the causeway connecting the Pyramid of Khafre to the Sphinx, there existed a vertical shaft marked on old maps, mentioned in scattered reports, but never properly explored. Rumors circulated among workers and guides. Some said it connected to the Great Pyramid. Others claimed it led to secret chambers beneath the Sphinx. Most believed it was nothing, just another abandoned construction shaft. Hawass assembled a team, cleared the opening, and began the descent. 9 meters down, they reached the first chamber, carved directly into bedrock, with walls smooth and precise. But this chamber violated every rule of Egyptian burial practice. No hieroglyphs. No inscriptions. No prayers for the dead. Just bare stone walls and another shaft descending deeper into darkness. 14 meters below ground level, they reached the second chamber, and the mystery exploded into something far stranger than anyone anticipated. The level was not a single room but a central corridor running east to west with 6 smaller chambers branching off like petals of a stone flower. And in this corridor, impossible objects waited. 2 massive granite sarcophagi, each weighing 15 tons, lowered somehow down a narrow shaft, positioned with precision in confined spaces. No inscriptions. No decorations. No indication of who they were meant to hold. And when the team opened them after weeks of preparation, they found nothing inside, no mummy, no burial goods, no evidence anyone had ever been placed inside, just pristine granite walls as if the containers had been sealed empty from the beginning. But the shaft descended further. 28 meters below ground, 90 feet beneath the desert surface, the team encountered exactly what Herodotus had described 2,400 years earlier. Water. Not seeping groundwater but an actual underground lake, filling the lowest chamber, maintained by channels carved into bedrock. The team set up industrial pumps and spent 2 months draining the chamber. And as the water level dropped, something emerged that no one alive had seen in more than 2,000 years. An island. A stone platform raised above the water level, exactly as Herodotus had written. 4 pillars surrounded it, marking corners like sentinels. And in the center sat another granite sarcophagus, 10 to 15 tons of solid stone, positioned on an island, in an artificial lake 90 feet underground. When they opened that final sarcophagus, they found it empty, completely empty, with no indication anyone had ever rested inside. Herodotus had been right about the lake, about the island, about the tomb beneath Giza. But the truth was stranger than his account suggested. This was not a tomb in any conventional sense. The sarcophagi were empty by design. The chambers lacked inscriptions intentionally. The entire complex served a purpose that had nothing to do with housing the dead and everything to do with something else, something the priests who spoke to Herodotus either did not explain or could not put into words he would understand. The Osiris Shaft, as it came to be called, was not supposed to exist. And now that we know it does, we are left with questions that archaeology refuses to answer. What were the ancient Egyptians really building beneath Giza? What knowledge did they possess that we have forgotten, and what else lies waiting in the darkness beneath the sand, beneath our understanding, beneath the comfortable narrative we tell ourselves about the past? The shaft revealed 3 levels of chambers, each deeper and stranger than the last, each violating established archaeological paradigms. But there was more. The second level included a passage extending eastward, blocked deliberately by a 15-ton granite sarcophagus wedged into the corridor. The passage pointed directly toward the Sphinx, toward the exact location where, in 1993, seismic surveys had detected underground anomalies, chambers possibly artificial, located where Edgar Cayce had predicted in 1933 that a hall of records existed. Dr. Horace faced a decision. Clear the passage or leave it sealed. Excavate toward the Sphinx or respect the ancient barrier. His team waited for orders. Equipment was ready. The blocked corridor could be cleared in days. This could be the discovery of the century. But Horace ordered the passage left alone, no explanation, no discussion, just a directive that ended all debate. The eastern corridor would remain blocked. Whatever lay beyond would continue its wait in darkness. And the questions multiplied. Why block a passage with such massive effort? Why seal it so thoroughly that removal would require industrial equipment? What lies beyond that granite barrier that warranted such extreme measures to prevent access? The 2025 discovery by Italian researchers using synthetic aperture radar brought these questions back into public consciousness. They claim to have detected 8 vertical shafts, each descending 650 meters, nearly 20 times deeper than the Osiris Shaft. The shafts have spiral pathways descending, with multiple levels of complex chambers. At the bottom, large cube-shaped rooms connected by horizontal tunnels extending more than 600 meters, creating a massive underground network. They published their findings, presented their methodology, offered their data for peer review. And Dr. Zahi Hawass dismissed it all as false news, as fabrication, as the work of people who lack knowledge. But the pattern is clear. Every decade, someone finds evidence of underground structures at Giza. Every time, official archaeology dismisses, denies, obstructs. In 1817, Giovanni Cavaglia discovered tunnels beneath the Sphinx. In 1933, the Egyptian government sealed those tunnels. In 1978, an American team detected chambers using ground-penetrating radar. Their access was revoked. In 1993, seismic surveys confirmed anomalies beneath the Sphinx. No excavation was permitted. In 1999, Hawass himself discovered the Osiris Shaft and ordered the eastern passage left blocked. In 2017, muon tomography detected voids beneath the Great Pyramid's foundation. The findings were downplayed. And now in 2025, radar detection reveals massive structures at unprecedented depths, and the response is the same: denial, dismissal, silence. Why? What is beneath Giza that warrants such consistent, such determined, such multi-generational protection? The official explanations sound reasonable. Preservation concerns, structural stability, tourist safety, limited resources. But these explanations do not withstand scrutiny. Modern technology allows non-invasive exploration. Robots can navigate narrow passages without human risk. Remote sensing can map structures without excavation. Yet permission is consistently denied, not because exploration is impossible, but because those in power prefer the structures remain unexplored, prefer the questions remain unanswered, prefer the narrative remain unchanged. The implications are staggering. If Herodotus was right about the underground lake and island, he was probably right about the 3,000 rooms. If the Osiris Shaft exists with its impossible engineering and empty sarcophagi, other similar complexes probably exist. If 2025 radar detection shows structures at 650 meters depth, the scale of underground Giza exceeds anything visible on the surface. We are not looking at tombs. We are looking at infrastructure, at a massive underground complex built for purposes that ancient texts hint at, but never fully explain, built with engineering that exceeds our understanding of ancient capabilities, built and then deliberately, hidden, sealed, protected across millennia by authorities who understood what they were guarding. The priests who spoke to Herodotus knew. They told him what they could, as much as they were permitted to reveal. But they kept the crucial details secret, maintained the protection that continues today. And we are left standing above, looking at pyramids, marveling at surface monuments, while, beneath our feet lies the real mystery, the real achievement, the real purpose of Giza. The underground city is not speculation. It is not conspiracy theory. It is documented in ancient texts, detected by modern technology, glimpsed in limited excavations. It exists. The only question is why we are not allowed to see it. The question is not whether ancient texts describe underground structures at Giza, but whether we are willing to believe what those texts actually say. For centuries, scholars have approached ancient writings with skepticism, assuming exaggeration, assuming misunderstanding, assuming that primitive people could not accurately record what they witnessed. This assumption has cost us dearly. We dismissed Herodotus for 2,400 years, until the Osiris Shaft proved him correct. How many other ancient writers were telling the truth, only to be ignored by modern academics who believed themselves superior to the ancients. Herodotus was not alone. He was not even the first. Egyptian texts from the Old Kingdom, written more than 4,500 years ago, reference the Duat, the underground realm of Osiris. Standard archaeology interprets this as mythology, as religious symbolism representing the afterlife. But what if the Duat was not symbolic? What if it was literal, a physical place beneath the plateau where rituals occurred, where initiations took place, where knowledge was stored and protected? The pyramid texts, carved into the walls of 5th and 6th dynasty pyramids, describe journeys through underground passages, through chambers filled with water, through gates guarded by supernatural beings. Again, scholars read this as myth. But the Osiris Shaft contains exactly what the texts describe: underground passages, chambers with water, barriers deliberately placed to restrict access. The correlation is too precise to dismiss as coincidence. The ancient Egyptians were describing real places using the language of religion, encoding geography in mythology, preserving knowledge of underground Giza in texts that would survive even if physical access was lost. They knew that dynasties fall, that conquests happen, that civilizations change. But texts endure. And so they wrote down what they knew, disguised as prayers and spells, hidden in plain sight for anyone wise enough to read between the lines. We were not wise enough. We read their descriptions of underground halls and subterranean lakes and called them imagination. We were wrong. Plato adds another layer to this ancient testimony. In his dialogues Timaeus and Critias, written around 360 BC, he recounts a story told to the Greek statesman Solon by Egyptian priests in the city of Cayce. They spoke of Atlantis, the legendary civilization that supposedly sank beneath the ocean 9,000 years before Solon's time. Modern scholars treat Atlantis as Plato's fictional allegory, a cautionary tale about hubris and divine punishment. But buried within his account is a curious detail that scholars rarely examine closely. The priests told Solon that records of Atlantis were preserved in Egypt, in sacred texts maintained by temple priests, in knowledge passed down from the time before the flood. Where would such records be kept? In structures vulnerable to conquest and fire? In buildings that could be destroyed by invading armies or religious zealots? No. Ancient wisdom was protected by placing it beyond reach, by hiding it where only initiates could access, where official guardians could control who learned what. Underground. In chambers carved deep beneath the plateau, where no conqueror could accidentally stumble upon them, where no casual visitor could discover them, where they would remain safe across millennia. The Egyptian priests who spoke to Solon knew exactly where those records were. And they chose not to tell him, chose to preserve the secret, chose to maintain the protection that continues to this day. Edgar Cayce entered this story in 1933, and his contribution remains controversial, dividing believers from skeptics, mystics from scientists, those who trust psychic revelation from those who demand physical evidence. Cayce was an American mystic who claimed to enter trance states and access knowledge from what he called the Akashic Records, a cosmic library containing all information past, present, and future. During hundreds of these trance sessions, Cayce spoke repeatedly about Egypt, about Atlantis, about a hall of records, buried beneath the Sphinx containing the complete history of Atlantean civilization, technological knowledge, from a lost age, proof that human civilization is far older and more advanced than conventional history acknowledges. Skeptics dismissed Cayce as a charlatan, as a fraud exploiting people's desire for mystery. His predictions seemed absurd. A hall of records beneath the Sphinx? Technology from Atlantis? Knowledge from 10,000 years ago? Archaeology had found no evidence supporting any of this. The Sphinx was dated to 2500 BC, built by Pharaoh Khafre according to accepted chronology. There were no chambers beneath it, no hidden rooms, no secret passages. Cayce was clearly inventing stories, clearly fabricating claims that could never be verified. Except that in 1993, 60 years after Cayce's death, seismic equipment detected exactly what he described, a rectangular chamber approximately 9 by 12 meters, located precisely where Cayce said it would be, 25 feet beneath the front paws of the Sphinx. The discovery should have vindicated Cayce, should have prompted immediate investigation, should have launched the most important excavation in archaeological history. Instead, Dr. Zahi Horace examined the data and declared the anomaly to be a natural cavity in the limestone, a geological formation with no archaeological significance. He denied permission for excavation. When independent researchers requested access, they were refused. When they appealed to international organizations, their appeals were ignored. The chamber that Cayce predicted remains sealed, untouched, officially non-existent despite clear evidence of its presence. This is not science. This is not archaeology. This is something else entirely, a deliberate policy of concealment maintained regardless of evidence, regardless of technology, regardless of what we could learn. The pattern becomes clearer when we examine what happened to researchers who pushed too hard. In 1993, the same year the chamber was detected beneath the Sphinx, Dr. Robert Schoch published his geological analysis proving that the Sphinx weathering patterns were caused by rainfall, not wind erosion. Rainfall in sufficient quantity to cause such deep erosion ceased in Egypt around 8000 BC, meaning the Sphinx had to be at least 10,000 years old, carved thousands of years before conventional Egyptology claims. Schoch presented his evidence at academic conferences, published in peer-reviewed journals, demonstrated his methodology to critics. The evidence was solid. The conclusions were inescapable. The Sphinx is far older than official chronology acknowledges. The archaeological establishment responded not with curiosity but with hostility. Schoch was attacked professionally, his credentials questioned, his methodology criticized, his conclusions dismissed as impossible despite the geological evidence supporting them. Dr. Mark Lehner, the leading Egyptologist specializing in the Sphinx, countered with alternative explanations, claiming the erosion could be caused by wind or chemical weathering, ignoring the fact that neighboring structures showed completely different weathering patterns. The debate became polarized, emotional, defensive. But beneath the academic arguments lay a deeper resistance. If the Sphinx is 10,000 years old, then the entire timeline of Egyptian civilization must be revised. And if the timeline is wrong, then the narrative is wrong. And if the narrative is wrong, then everything we teach, everything in textbooks, everything in museums, becomes questionable. This is the real reason for resistance. Not concern about evidence, but concern about implications. Accepting an older Sphinx means accepting that advanced civilization existed before the Neolithic Revolution, before agriculture, before the rise of cities, during the period when humans were supposedly hunter-gatherers incapable of monumental architecture. It means accepting that our understanding of human development is incomplete, that something significant is missing from our history, that the story we tell ourselves about our past is wrong in fundamental ways. And institutions do not easily admit they have been wrong for generations, do not easily rewrite textbooks, do not easily tell the public that everything they learned in school was based on incomplete evidence and flawed assumptions. So instead of investigating, they deny. Instead of excavating, they forbid. Instead of questioning, they dismiss. The chamber beneath the Sphinx remains sealed because opening it risks confirming what authorities fear most, that Cayce was right, that ancient texts were accurate, that underground Giza contains knowledge that contradicts approved narratives. The priests who spoke to Herodotus knew about these chambers. The priests who spoke to Plato knew about ancient records. The guardians who maintain secrecy today know what lies beneath the Sphinx. They choose silence because revelation would be catastrophic, not for humanity, but for institutions built on controlling knowledge, on gatekeeping truth, on maintaining authority through information monopoly. Consider what happened in 2002 when National Geographic funded an expedition to explore shafts inside the Great Pyramid using a miniature robot equipped with a camera. The project was broadcast live, with millions watching worldwide as the robot drilled through a door at the end of the southern shaft in the Queen's Chamber. Everyone expected a burial chamber or treasure room. Instead, the camera revealed another door, another barrier, another obstacle preventing access. The broadcast ended with questions unanswered. National Geographic promised follow-up exploration. Years passed. No follow-up occurred. When researchers asked why, they received vague answers about technical difficulties, about permit issues, about scheduling conflicts. The real reason was simpler. The expedition had been approved expecting it would find nothing significant. When it revealed additional chambers, authorities realized that continued exploration might lead somewhere they did not want to go. The same pattern repeats across decades. In 2017, the Scan Pyramids project used muon tomography to detect a large void above the Grand Gallery in the Great Pyramid. The discovery made headlines worldwide. Scientists called it one of the most important findings in Egyptian archaeology in decades. The void was massive, 30 meters long, with a cross-section similar to the Grand Gallery itself. It suggested the pyramid contained spaces unknown to modern archaeology, chambers that might hold artifacts, inscriptions, evidence about how and why the pyramid was built. Dr. Zahi Horace immediately dismissed the findings, claiming the void was just an internal structure with no archaeological significance. He stated that the pyramid had been completely explored and contained no hidden chambers. This was demonstrably false, but his authority carried weight. No excavation was permitted. No further investigation occurred. The void remains unexplored, officially acknowledged but practically ignored. These are not isolated incidents. This is systematic suppression, a coordinated effort across institutions and generations to prevent full exploration of Giza, to limit what can be discovered, to control what becomes public knowledge. The question is why? What could be so dangerous that it warrants such extreme measures? What knowledge could be so threatening that authorities prefer to leave chambers sealed rather than risk revelation? The answer lies in understanding what underground Giza really represents. It is not just ancient burial chambers. It is evidence of a civilization far more advanced than conventional history acknowledges, a civilization that possessed knowledge we are only beginning to rediscover, a civilization that built not just monuments but infrastructure, not just tombs, but functional complexes serving purposes we do not yet understand. The ancient texts confirm this. The Book of the Dead describes the Duat as containing halls of judgment, lakes of fire, gates guarded by beings with animal heads and human bodies. Modern readers interpret this as supernatural fantasy. But strip away the religious language and what remains? Underground halls, illuminated spaces requiring light sources described as fire, checkpoints controlled by guardians wearing ritual masks. The text is describing a real place using the vocabulary available to ancient writers. They could not say electric lights because they had no word for electricity. They could not say security checkpoints because they had no concept of modern access control. So they used the language of religion, the language of myth, the language that would preserve the knowledge even if literal understanding was lost. The same applies to descriptions of Osiris ruling the Duat. Modern interpretation treats Osiris as a deity, as mythology, as religious symbolism. But what if Osiris was a title, not a name? What if it designated the chief administrator of underground Giza, the person responsible for maintaining the complex, for controlling access, for protecting what was stored there? Ancient Egyptian texts frequently use divine names for human offices. Pharaoh was called Horus, the living god. High priests were called servants of the gods. Why not extend this pattern? The Osiris would be the guardian of the underground realm, a human position mythologized over centuries into a divine figure. The actual person is forgotten, but the role remains, encoded in mythology, preserved in texts that describe his domain, his responsibilities, his authority over the chambers beneath the plateau. If this interpretation is correct, then the Osiris Shaft is not named metaphorically. It is the actual entrance to the domain of the Osiris, the physical access point to underground Giza, the place where the guardian maintained control. The empty sarcophagi make sense in this context. They were not for burial. They were barriers, massive stone obstacles placed to block passages, to prevent unauthorized access, to ensure that only those with proper authority and equipment could proceed deeper. The underground lake served the same purpose. Anyone entering the shaft would encounter water, would need pumps and boats, would need organization and resources beyond what casual intruders could provide. These were not religious features. They were security features, practical measures designed to protect what lay beyond from those who should not reach it. And what lay beyond? The ancient texts speak of halls containing knowledge, of libraries inscribed on walls, of secrets taught only to initiates who proved themselves worthy. Cayce spoke of Atlantean records, of technological knowledge from a lost civilization. Modern radar detection shows massive structures at unprecedented depths. All evidence points to the same conclusion. Beneath Giza lies a repository, a storage facility, a complex designed to preserve knowledge across millennia, to protect it from conquest and catastrophe, to ensure that even if surface civilization collapsed, the knowledge would survive, waiting for the time when humanity was ready to reclaim it. That time may be now. Or authorities may believe that time has not yet come, that we are not ready, that revelation would cause more harm than continued secrecy. Either way, the truth remains buried, protected by official denial, guarded by institutional resistance, hidden beneath the sand while we stand above, looking at pyramids, never suspecting what lies beneath our feet. The first documented discovery of underground passages at Giza did not happen in the 20th century, did not wait for modern technology, did not require sophisticated equipment or government approval. It happened in 1817, during an era when Egypt was more accessible to foreign explorers, when Ottoman rule permitted excavations that later governments would forbid, when curiosity was valued over control. Giovanni Battista Caviglia, an Italian ship captain turned adventurer, became obsessed with the Sphinx. He spent months clearing sand from around the monument, excavating the chest and paws that had been buried for centuries. And in the process, he discovered something that would be forgotten, denied, and ultimately sealed by authorities who preferred it remain hidden. Between the paws of the Sphinx, Caviglia found an opening, a narrow passage descending into bedrock, stairs carved into stone leading down into darkness. He entered with lanterns and surveyed what he could reach. The passage was not natural. The walls were worked, the stairs deliberate, the construction unmistakably artificial. He descended approximately 30 meters before encountering water, stagnant and deep, blocking further progress. He documented what he found, published his observations, included diagrams in his reports. And then the passage was forgotten, buried again under bureaucratic indifference, mentioned occasionally in obscure archaeological literature but never seriously investigated. Why did Caviglia stop? He lacked pumping equipment, lacked funding to drain the flooded sections, lacked official support to continue. But more importantly, he lacked understanding of what he had discovered. To him, this was an interesting architectural feature, a curious detail about Sphinx construction. He did not realize he had found what Herodotus described, what ancient texts referenced, what would later be connected to Cayce's predictions. He discovered the entrance to underground Giza and walked away, leaving it for future generations who would not be permitted to follow where he had gone. A century later, the political situation had changed dramatically. Egypt gained increasing control over its antiquities, establishing departments and regulations designed to protect national treasures from foreign exploitation. This was necessary and appropriate. Too many artifacts had been stolen, too many sites damaged by careless excavation, too many discoveries exported to European museums. Egyptian sovereignty over Egyptian heritage was both just and overdue. But along with protection came control. And control meant deciding what could be excavated, what could be published, what the world would be allowed to know. In 1933, at the height of this new regulatory environment, the Egyptian government closed the passages beneath the Sphinx. The official reason given was structural preservation, preventing damage from unauthorized entry. The real reason was never explained. What changed in 1933? Why suddenly seal passages that had been accessible for centuries? The timing is significant. This was the same year Edgar Cayce began giving his most detailed readings about the Hall of Records, the same year he predicted its location beneath the Sphinx, the same year his claims started attracting international attention. Coincidence? Or did authorities decide that growing public interest in underground chambers required preventive action, required sealing access, before too many people started asking uncomfortable questions, before explorers like Cavaglia could return, with modern equipment and discover what lay beyond the water barrier? The pattern established in 1933 has continued without interruption. Every attempt to explore the sealed passages has been denied. Every request for permits has been rejected. Every argument based on scientific value or historical importance has been dismissed. And the official explanation remains the same: preservation, safety, protection of the monument. But preservation from what? The passages are sealed, inaccessible to tourists and vandals. Safety for whom? Professional archaeologists with proper equipment face no danger from flooded chambers. Protection of what? If the chambers contain nothing significant, why not allow investigation to prove their insignificance? The questions answer themselves. The chambers are sealed not to protect them but to protect what they contain, to ensure that whatever lies beyond the water remains undiscovered, unannounced, unknown. In 1978, the situation escalated. The Association for Research and Enlightenment, founded by Edgar Cayce's followers, sponsored a scientific expedition to Giza. They partnered with SRI International, a respected research organization, bringing ground-penetrating radar equipment to survey the area around the Sphinx. The team included qualified geophysicists, experienced technicians, proper credentials, and permissions. They were not treasure hunters or mystics. They were scientists conducting legitimate research using proven technology. The Egyptian authorities approved the survey, expecting perhaps that modern equipment would debunk Cayce's claims, would prove the absence of hidden chambers, would finally settle the question. The radar revealed anomalies. Multiple underground voids in locations where solid bedrock should exist. The largest anomaly appeared near the front right paw of the Sphinx, exactly where Cayce had predicted, approximately 9 by 12 meters in dimension, rectangular in shape, clearly artificial in construction. The team documented everything, prepared detailed reports, requested permission to investigate further. And then the permission was revoked. The expedition was terminated. The team was asked to leave. When they inquired why, they received vague explanations about permit technicalities, about changed circumstances, about decisions made at higher levels. Their findings were not disputed. The anomalies were acknowledged. But no further investigation would be permitted. One member of that team later spoke privately about what happened, on condition of anonymity, unwilling to risk complete blacklisting from Egyptian archaeology. He described the atmosphere after the radar results came back. The excitement among the team members. The shock among the Egyptian officials who had expected negative results. Emergency meetings conducted in Arabic, excluding the foreign researchers. Consultations with authorities in Cairo. And then the shutdown, abrupt and final, with no explanation that made scientific sense. He believed then, and still believes, that the survey found exactly what authorities feared it would find, proof that Cayce was right, that chambers exist beneath the Sphinx, that the Hall of Records is real. And rather than allow discovery, they chose denial. 15 years later, in 1993, another team tried again. This time the survey was led by Dr. Robert Schoch, the geologist whose erosion analysis suggested the Sphinx was thousands of years older than conventional chronology accepted. Schoch's team included Thomas de Becky, a seismologist who used acoustic techniques to map underground structures. The survey was more sophisticated than the 1978 effort, using seismic refraction and reflection methods that could penetrate deeper and provide more detailed data. And once again, they detected the anomaly beneath the front pores, the same location, the same dimensions, the same characteristics that suggested artificial construction. De Becky published his findings in peer-reviewed journals. The data was solid. The methodology was sound. The conclusions were unavoidable. Something man-made exists beneath the Sphinx. Dr. Zahi Horace responded by declaring the anomaly to be a natural cavity, a geological feature of no archaeological interest. When asked how he could be certain without excavation, he stated that he knew the geology of Giza better than anyone and required no further investigation. When independent researchers pointed out that his assessment contradicted the scientific data, he accused them of promoting pseudoscience, of pursuing fantasy, of disrespecting Egyptian heritage. The discussion ended. No excavation was permitted. The anomaly remains officially unexplained, acknowledged but ignored, documented but unexplored. And Hawassa's authority ensured that no one could challenge the decision. The media played a crucial role in keeping the Hall of Records in public consciousness despite official suppression. In 1993, the television documentary The Mystery of the Sphinx introduced millions of viewers to Schoch's erosion hypothesis, to de Becky's seismic findings, to Cayce's predictions about hidden chambers. The documentary was professionally produced, scientifically rigorous, careful to distinguish evidence from speculation. It presented the case that the Sphinx was older than accepted chronology, that chambers existed beneath it, that something significant was being kept secret. The response was overwhelming. Public interest exploded. Books on the subject became bestsellers. Tourist inquiries flooded Egyptian tourism offices. Everyone wanted to know what was beneath the Sphinx. Egyptian authorities responded with a coordinated media campaign denying everything. Horace appeared on television programs, gave newspaper interviews, wrote articles declaring that foreign researchers were spreading false information, that the Sphinx had been completely explored, that no hidden chambers existed. He accused Graham Hancock and Robert Bauval, authors who had written extensively about the Hall of Records, of inventing conspiracy theories to sell books. He characterized anyone questioning official archaeology as enemies of Egypt, as people trying to steal Egyptian heritage by claiming that ancient Egyptians could not have built their own monuments. This was a deliberate mischaracterization. No one was claiming Egyptians did not build the Sphinx. The claim was that it was older than official chronology acknowledged, that chambers existed beneath it, that full investigation had been prevented. But Hawassa's rhetorical strategy was effective. By framing the debate as foreign attack on Egyptian pride, he shifted discussion away from evidence and toward nationalism, making it politically impossible to support further investigation without appearing anti-Egyptian. The tactic worked. By the late 1990s, public interest had waned. The discovery that seemed imminent in 1993 had not occurred. Authorities had successfully blocked all attempts at excavation. And without new developments, media attention moved to other stories. The Hall of Records faded from headlines, remembered by enthusiasts but forgotten by the general public. It appeared that official denial had won, that the question was settled, that nothing would change. Until 1999, when Dr. Horace made a decision that would inadvertently validate everything that had been claimed about underground Giza. The Osiris Shaft excavation, described in detail earlier, was officially presented as routine archaeological work, as investigation of a known feature, as nothing particularly significant. But the timing was curious. Why excavate this particular shaft in 1999, just as the window Cayce had predicted for the Hall of Records discovery was closing? Cayce had stated that revelation would occur between 1996 and 1998. That period had passed without the promised opening. Critics declared Cayce's prophecy false, his entire narrative discredited. And then, 1 year after the deadline, Horace excavated the Osiris Shaft and found exactly what ancient texts described: underground chambers, artificial lakes, passages blocked by massive stone barriers. The discovery validated Herodotus. It confirmed that underground complexes existed. It proved that ancient testimony about subterranean Giza was accurate. But it did not validate Cayce specifically. The shaft was not the Hall of Records. It did not contain Atlantean records or ancient texts. It was empty, enigmatic, unexplained. And perhaps that was intentional. Perhaps Horace excavated the Osiris Shaft as a controlled disclosure, as a way to acknowledge underground structures while preventing the specific discovery that Cayce had predicted. By opening one shaft, he could claim transparency, could demonstrate that authorities were not hiding anything, could show that underground chambers, when properly investigated, contain nothing that challenges conventional history. The fact that those chambers raised more questions than they answered, that they violated every principle of Egyptian burial practice, that they suggested purposes archaeology could not explain, was simply ignored. The excavation occurred. The findings were published. And then everyone moved on, leaving the real mysteries unaddressed. The eastern passage in the Osiris Shaft, blocked by the 15-ton sarcophagus, points directly toward the Sphinx. Its trajectory, when projected horizontally, intersects the exact location where the 1993 seismic survey detected the anomaly beneath the Sphinx's front paws. This is not coincidence. This is confirmation. The passage leads to the chamber. The chamber is the Hall of Records. And the massive granite barrier was placed specifically to prevent anyone following the passage from the Osiris Shaft to the hall itself. Why such extreme measures? Because the Osiris Shaft was discovered accidentally during excavation work that encountered it unexpectedly. The ancient builders knew that future generations might find the shaft. So they sealed the crucial passage, ensured that even if someone reached the second level, they could not proceed further without moving a 15-ton obstacle, without industrial equipment, without official approval. The protection worked. For thousands of years, the shaft remained hidden. When it was finally discovered and excavated, the blocked passage prevented access to what lay beyond. Horace could investigate the shaft, could document the chambers, could publish findings, all while ensuring that the final secret remained protected. He could claim transparency while maintaining concealment. he could acknowledge underground structures while preventing the discovery that would truly matter. The Hall of Records remained sealed, accessed not through the surface entrance that Caviglia found and authorities closed, but through the underground connection that the ancient builders created and then blocked, ensuring that only those with supreme authority and resources could reach it. And those in authority have decided, consistently across decades, that the hall will not be opened, that what it contains will not be revealed, that humanity is not yet ready for whatever truth waits in that sealed chamber beneath the Sphinx. The year 2017 marked a turning point in the study of underground Giza, not because authorities suddenly became transparent, but because technology advanced beyond their ability to completely control. The Scan Pyramids project, an international collaboration between Egyptian, French, and Japanese researchers, deployed muon tomography to examine the internal structure of the Great Pyramid without drilling, without excavation, without physical intrusion. Muons are subatomic particles created when cosmic rays strike Earth's atmosphere. They pass through most materials but are absorbed at different rates depending on density. By placing muon detectors inside the pyramid and measuring particle flows, researchers could create three-dimensional density maps revealing voids, chambers, and passages invisible to conventional methods. The technique was non-invasive, required no government approval for each measurement, and could not be stopped without shutting down the entire pyramid to tourists. This made it politically difficult to prevent. Egyptian authorities had learned to control physical excavation through permits and regulations, but they had not anticipated technological methods that required no digging. The Scan Pyramids team installed their detectors, collected data for months, and in November 2017 announced their findings. They had detected a massive void above the Grand Gallery, 30 meters long, with a cross-section similar to the gallery itself. The void was not small, not insignificant, not dismissible as a construction gap. It was a major architectural feature, comparable in size to known chambers, positioned in a location that suggested deliberate design rather than accidental formation. The announcement generated international headlines. Scientists called it the most important discovery in the Great Pyramid since the 19th century. Egyptologists debated its purpose. Engineers marveled at the precision of the detection. And Dr. Zahi Hawass immediately declared the findings meaningless, stating that the pyramid had been completely explored and the void represented nothing of archaeological significance. He did not explain how he could be certain without investigation. He did not address the data showing a 30-meter void where solid stone should exist. He simply denied the importance and moved on, expecting his authority to settle the matter. But the Scan Pyramids team had done something Hawass could not control. They had published their methodology, their data, their findings in Nature, one of the world's most prestigious scientific journals. The peer review process had validated their work. Other scientists could examine their evidence, replicate their methods, challenge their conclusions through proper academic channels. This was not alternative archaeology or fringe speculation. This was mainstream science, published in a journal that required extraordinary evidence and rigorous methodology. Dismissing it as meaningless was no longer sufficient. The void existed. The question was why authorities refused to investigate it. The answer became clearer when researchers analyzed what the muon detection revealed beyond just the void itself. The data showed density variations extending below the pyramid's foundation, suggesting that structural features continued into bedrock beneath the base. This was unexpected. Conventional archaeology held that pyramids were built on natural bedrock, that their foundations sat on solid stone without underlying construction. But the muon data suggested otherwise, indicated that the builders had carved into bedrock below the pyramid, had created chambers or passages extending downward, had built not just upward but also downward. This matched what the Italian team would later claim using different technology, matched what ancient texts described, matched the pattern established by the Osiris Shaft. The pyramids were not independent monuments. They were entrances, markers, the visible portions of a larger complex extending into the earth. The implications were too significant to ignore, too dangerous to fully acknowledge. If the pyramids connected to underground structures, then the entire narrative of their purpose required revision. They were not just tombs. They were something more complex, more sophisticated, more mysterious than conventional Egyptology admitted. The scan pyramids data provided scientific validation for claims that had been dismissed as speculation. And that validation was politically unacceptable. So Horace dismissed the findings, knowing that most media would report his denial alongside the discovery, creating false equivalence between scientific evidence and official statement, leaving the public confused about what was true. 8 years later, in March 2025, the Italian research team led by Corrado Malanga and Filippo Biondi announced findings that made the 2017 void detection seem modest by comparison. Using synthetic aperture radar combined with artificial intelligence analysis, they claimed to have mapped massive structures beneath the Khafre Pyramid extending 648 meters into the earth. Not 30 meters like the void. Not 90 feet like the Osiris Shaft. But 648 meters, deeper than most modern buildings are tall, deeper than anyone had previously imagined ancient construction could reach. The structures they described defied conventional understanding. 8 vertical shafts arranged in 2 rows of 4, each shaft hollow and cylindrical with spiral pathways winding around the interior like helical staircases. At the bottom, 2 enormous cube-shaped chambers, each approximately 80 meters across, connected by horizontal tunnels that extended across the plateau, linking all 3 main pyramids into a unified underground network spanning 2 kilometers. The scale was staggering. If accurate, this represented the largest ancient construction project ever discovered, exceeding even the pyramids themselves, in volume of excavated material. The engineering required would surpass modern capabilities for excavating at such depths without mechanical equipment. The purpose would transcend simple burial, would indicate functions that archaeology had never seriously considered. This was not a tomb complex. This was infrastructure, a massive underground system built to serve needs we do not understand, built with technology we cannot explain, built and then hidden so effectively that 4,500 years passed before modern radar could detect it. The team presented their findings at a press conference attended by over 1,000 delegates, live-streamed on YouTube for global audiences, documented with detailed images and technical specifications. They explained their methodology, showed their radar tomograms, offered their data for independent verification. This was not a rumor or unsubstantiated claim. This was a formal scientific announcement by researchers affiliated with respected universities, using established technology, following proper protocols. The evidence deserved serious consideration, warranted official investigation, required Egyptian authorities to either confirm or disprove through excavation. Dr. Zahi Horace responded within days, calling the claims false news, stating categorically that no such structures existed beneath Giza. He accused the researchers of lacking knowledge about Egyptian civilization, of promoting sensationalism, of seeking publicity rather than truth. He did not address their methodology. He did not critique their data. He did not offer alternative explanations for the radar anomalies. He simply declared them wrong and expected the matter to be settled by his authority. But this time, the response was different. The researchers had anticipated denial. They had prepared for institutional resistance. And they had taken their case directly to the public, bypassing traditional gatekeepers, using modern media, to reach millions of people before official archaeology could suppress the story. The public reaction was intense. Social media exploded with discussion. YouTube videos analyzing the findings received millions of views. News outlets in multiple countries covered the announcement, often presenting it as fact rather than speculation. Egyptian tourism inquiries spiked, with visitors wanting to know when the underground city would be open to tourists. The government faced pressure to respond substantively, to allow independent verification, to prove their denial was based on evidence rather than ideology. And for the first time in decades, official denial was not enough. The story did not fade. The questions did not stop. The demand for investigation continued. This created a political problem. If authorities continued to simply deny without investigation, they appeared to be hiding something, appeared to fear what excavation might reveal, appeared to value control over truth. But if they allowed investigation and the Italian findings were confirmed, the entire narrative of Egyptian archaeology would require revision, textbooks would need rewriting, international implications would emerge about who really built these structures and why. The choice was between maintaining denial and risking credibility, or allowing investigation and risking revelation. Neither option was acceptable. So authorities chose a middle path, announcing that Egyptian experts would conduct their own survey using similar technology, promising results within the year, effectively delaying any decision while appearing cooperative. The Egyptian survey began in June 2025 and concluded in September. The results have not been publicly released as of October 2025. Official statements indicate that analysis is ongoing, that findings will be announced when complete, that premature disclosure would be scientifically irresponsible. Meanwhile, the Italian team has published additional data, has offered to collaborate with Egyptian researchers, has maintained that their findings are accurate and verifiable by anyone with appropriate equipment. The standoff continues. But something has changed. The secret is no longer fully protected. Too many people know about the claims. Too many are asking questions. Too much attention is focused on what lies beneath Giza for authorities to simply ignore the issue and wait for public interest to fade. The technology itself represents a crucial shift in power dynamics. For centuries, archaeology was controlled by those with physical access to sites, by those who could obtain permits and funding, by institutional gatekeepers who decided what got excavated and what remained buried. But modern remote sensing technology operates differently. Satellites can scan from orbit without requiring ground permission. Radar can penetrate stone from surface installations. Muon detectors can map internal structures without excavation. Artificial intelligence can analyze data faster and more comprehensively than human researchers. These technologies democratize discovery, allowing independent researchers to detect structures without official cooperation, to announce findings without institutional approval, to challenge official narratives with scientific evidence that cannot be dismissed through bureaucratic obstruction alone. This is why the 2025 announcement was different from previous claims. The Italian team did not ask permission. They did not wait for approval. They used satellite data that anyone could theoretically access, processed it with software they developed, and presented findings based on methodology that could be peer-reviewed and replicated. Egyptian authorities could deny the claims, but they could not prevent the research, could not confiscate the data, could not silence the researchers through administrative pressure. The information was already public, already spreading, already beyond control. And this pattern will continue. Technology will keep improving. Satellite resolution will increase. Radar penetration will deepen. Artificial intelligence will detect patterns humans miss. Each advancement will make it harder to maintain secrets, harder to control narratives, harder to prevent discoveries that challenge established understanding. The underground structures, whether 648 meters deep or less, whether exactly as the Italians describe or somewhat different, clearly exist. Too much evidence has accumulated from too many independent sources using too many different methodologies. Herodotus described them 2,400 years ago. Ancient Egyptian texts reference them. Caviglia found entrance passages in 1817. Ground-penetrating radar detected anomalies in 1978 and 1993. The Osiris Shaft revealed underground chambers in 1999. Muon tomography showed voids extending below the pyramid foundation in 2017. And SAR technology mapped massive structures in 2025. Each piece of evidence stands alone. Together, they form an overwhelming case that Giza is not just surface monuments but a complex system extending deep underground, built by people who possess knowledge and capabilities we have not fully appreciated. The question is no longer whether underground structures exist, but what they contain, why they were built, and why authorities work so hard to prevent their exploration. The answers to these questions will reshape our understanding of ancient Egypt, of human civilization, of our own history in ways we cannot yet fully anticipate. And those answers are waiting, deep beneath the sand, in chambers sealed for millennia, protected by stone and water and official secrecy, waiting for the moment when technology advances beyond the ability to suppress, when public pressure exceeds the ability to resist, when the secret can no longer be kept. Understanding what the Italian team actually discovered requires examining not just their claims but their methodology, not just what they say exists but how they determined it exists. Synthetic aperture radar technology operates on principles that sound like science fiction but represent cutting-edge satellite imaging. Traditional radar sends electromagnetic pulses toward Earth and measures reflections from the surface. But SAR does something more sophisticated. It tracks micro-movements, tiny vibrations in structures caused by background seismic activity, thermal expansion, atmospheric pressure changes, and other forces that create constant motion too small for human perception but detectable by sensitive instruments orbiting hundreds of miles above. Filippo Biondi, a telecommunications engineer from the University of Strathclyde, developed a novel approach to SAR analysis. Instead of simply measuring surface reflections, he converted electromagnetic signals into acoustic data, creating what he called phononic imaging. The technique works like medical ultrasound but at vastly larger scale. When structures vibrate, different materials and void spaces respond differently. Solid stone vibrates uniformly. Hollow chambers create resonance patterns. Tunnels produce distinct acoustic signatures. By analyzing these micro-movements detected from satellite passes over months, Biondi could create three-dimensional maps of internal and subsurface features without physically accessing the site, without excavation, without even being in Egypt. The methodology sounds plausible when explained by someone with proper credentials using established physics. Biondi published preliminary findings in academic preprint servers, demonstrating that the technique could detect known internal features of the Great Pyramid with accuracy matching physical surveys. This validation was crucial. Critics could not simply dismiss the method as pseudoscience when it successfully identified chambers that archaeology had already documented. If the technique accurately detected known features, it should also accurately detect unknown features. The logic was sound. The physics was established. The implementation was innovative but not fantastic. This was real science, properly conducted, yielding results that could be verified or refuted through follow-up investigation. Corrado Malanga, the other lead researcher from the University of Pisa, brought a different perspective to the project. A professor of organic chemistry by training, Malanga had spent decades researching alternative interpretations of ancient structures. His background was academically respectable but controversial. He had published papers on pyramid acoustics, on ancient Egyptian texts that mainstream Egyptology ignored, on theories that pyramids functioned as energy systems rather than tombs. Some colleagues respected his interdisciplinary approach. Others dismissed him as someone who had strayed from proper science into speculation. And critics pointed to his research into UFO phenomena and consciousness studies as evidence that he could not be trusted on any subject. This controversy would later be used to discredit the entire SAR project, regardless of the actual evidence. But in early 2022, Malanga and Biondi were simply two researchers collaborating on an interesting project. They obtained access to Italian Cosmo SkyMed satellite data, a second-generation SAR system with resolution sufficient to detect centimeter-scale movements from orbit. They focused on the Khafre Pyramid, the second largest at Giza, less studied than the Great Pyramid but potentially more revealing because it had fewer previous excavations that might complicate interpretation. They processed months of satellite passes, converted the data using Biondi's phononic method, constructed three-dimensional density maps, and began identifying anomalies. What they found exceeded anything they had anticipated, exceeded what seemed geologically possible, exceeded what archaeology had ever considered. The data showed 8 vertical structures extending approximately 648 meters below the pyramid, arranged in 2 parallel rows of 4, each structure hollow and cylindrical with internal features suggesting spiral pathways. At the bottom, 2 massive cube-shaped chambers, each roughly 80 meters across, larger than any chamber in any pyramid. And connecting these cubes, horizontal tunnels extending outward, linking to similar structures beneath the other pyramids, creating a network spanning the entire plateau. The scale defied belief. The precision seemed impossible for ancient construction. The depth exceeded what could be excavated without modern machinery. Yet the SAR data was clear. These structures existed, all the data was fundamentally flawed in ways that remained unexplained. Malanga and Biondi faced a decision. Publish through traditional academic channels, submitting to peer review, waiting months or years for approval, risking rejection by reviewers skeptical of revolutionary claims. Or announce directly to the public, present their findings at a press conference, release their data openly, and let the scientific community respond? They chose the latter, organizing a presentation in March 2025 attended by over 1,000 delegates, live-streamed globally, documented, with detailed images and technical specifications. The announcement created immediate viral sensation, exactly as they had anticipated and exactly as critics would later use against them. The reaction split predictably along ideological lines. Alternative researchers celebrated the findings as vindication, as proof that ancient civilizations were more advanced than acknowledged, as confirmation that underground Giza existed exactly as alternative theories predicted. Mainstream archaeologists denounced the claims as sensationalism, as unverified speculation, as irresponsible announcement of findings that required peer review before public disclosure. And Egyptologists, led by Dr. Zahi Horace, rejected the entire project as false news, as fabrication by people lacking knowledge of Egyptian civilization, as another attempt by foreigners to steal credit from Egyptian achievements. But buried within the controversy was a crucial point that most observers missed. The Italian team did not claim to have discovered underground structures. They claimed to have detected anomalies in SAR data consistent with underground structures. This distinction matters. They were not making definitive archaeological claims. They were presenting geophysical data and offering interpretation. The proper scientific response should have been verification, not dismissal. Egyptian authorities should have conducted their own SAR survey using independent equipment and methodology. If the anomalies appeared in multiple independent datasets, they required explanation. If they did not appear, the Italian interpretation was flawed. Either outcome would advance knowledge. Instead, authorities chose denial without investigation, rejection without verification, dismissal based on authority rather than evidence. The Egyptian government did eventually announce their own survey would be conducted, using equipment and expertise from Cairo University and the Ministry of Antiquities. This seemed like appropriate response, exactly what scientific method required. The survey began in June 2025, 3 months after the Italian announcement. Egyptian researchers deployed their own SAR systems, collected data over several months, and began analysis. But as months passed without results being released, questions emerged about whether the survey was genuinely attempting to verify the Italian findings or simply going through motions to appear responsive while having no intention of confirming anything that contradicted official narratives. By October 2025, 7 months after the Italian announcement and for months after the Egyptian survey began, no official results had been released. Statements from the Ministry of Antiquities indicated that analysis was ongoing, that findings would be announced when complete, that rushing to conclusions would be scientifically irresponsible. But the delay suggested something more complex than careful analysis. If the Egyptian survey had found nothing, authorities would likely announce negative results immediately, using them to discredit the Italian claims and settle the controversy. If they had found confirmation of the anomalies, they faced difficult decisions about how to proceed. The delay suggested the latter, suggested that Egyptian researchers had detected the same structures, that authorities were debating internally what to reveal and how to explain findings that contradicted everything they had previously stated about Giza. Meanwhile, independent researchers began attempting their own verification. Several teams acquired access to satellite data from different sources, applied various analysis methods, and started reporting their results online. The findings were mixed. Some claimed to detect anomalies consistent with the Italian report. Others found nothing unusual. The variation suggested that methodology mattered enormously, that different approaches to processing SAR data yielded different results, that distinguishing real structures from processing artifacts required expertise that not everyone possessed. This complexity gave both sides ammunition. Supporters pointed to confirmatory findings. Critics pointed to contradictory results. And the truth remained obscured by methodological debates too technical for most observers to evaluate. The core question was whether the structures could be verified through means other than SAR analysis. The Osiris Shaft demonstrated that underground chambers existed at Giza. The 2017 muon detection showed that voids extended beneath pyramid foundations. Multiple ground-penetrating radar surveys had detected anomalies over decades. All this evidence supported the general claim that underground Giza was more extensive than surface monuments. But did this mean the specific structures the Italian team described actually existed? 8 shafts descending 648 meters, 2 cube-shaped chambers 80 meters across. Tunnels connecting all 3 pyramids? These specific claims required specific verification, required investigation beyond remote sensing, required eventually someone to physically access these spaces and confirm they matched the SAR data. And this is where authority mattered most. Only Egyptian government could grant permission for excavation. Only official archaeology could conduct investigations that would be accepted as definitive. Independent researchers could collect all the remote sensing data they wanted, but without physical access, without ability to drill or excavate, their findings would remain disputed, their claims unproven, their evidence always subject to alternative interpretation. Egyptian authorities knew this, knew that maintaining control over physical access meant maintaining control over what could be definitively proven, meant ensuring that no discovery would occur without their approval and management. The Italian team understood this dynamic. They knew their announcement would create controversy. They knew authorities would deny their findings. They knew that without excavation, proof would remain elusive. But they also knew that public awareness created pressure, that once millions of people knew about potential underground structures, the question would not disappear, would continue demanding answer, would make it harder for authorities to simply maintain silence indefinitely. Their strategy was not to prove the structures existed but to force the question into public consciousness, to make denial politically costly, to create a situation where authorities would eventually have to allow investigation or face growing accusations of suppression. Whether this strategy will succeed remains to be seen. As of October 2025, the controversy continues. The Italian team has released additional analysis, has offered to collaborate with Egyptian researchers, has maintained that their findings are accurate and verifiable. Egyptian authorities have continued to deny the claims while promising their own results will be released soon. And the public waits, suspended between extraordinary claims and official denial, unable to determine truth without access to evidence that only those in power can provide. This is not how science should work. This is not how knowledge should advance. But this is how archaeology operates when discoveries threaten narratives that institutions have invested everything in maintaining. The structures beneath Giza, whether 648 meters deep or less, whether exactly as described or somewhat different, represent more than archaeological curiosity. They represent a challenge to how we understand ancient capabilities, to what we believe possible with pre-industrial technology, to the narrative of human progress that assumes modern civilization is the most advanced that has ever existed. If the structures exist as described, they suggest ancient engineers possessed knowledge and capabilities we have not appreciated. They suggest purpose and planning that transcend simple burial monuments. They suggest that something profound was happening at Giza beyond what archaeology has acknowledged. And this suggestion is what authorities find intolerable, what they will resist regardless of evidence, what they will deny until proof becomes so overwhelming that denial is no longer sustainable. The debate over what exists beneath the Sphinx leads directly to understanding what the Osiris Shaft revealed about underground Giza as a whole. When Dr. Hawassa's team reached the second level of the shaft in 1999, they found not just 3 empty sarcophagi but a complex architectural system that challenged every assumption about ancient Egyptian construction. The 6 smaller chambers branching off the main corridor were precisely carved, symmetrically arranged, and completely empty. No burial goods. No pottery fragments. No tools left behind by workers. Just bare stone rooms serving no obvious purpose. This absence of function was itself significant. Egyptian tombs always contained goods for the afterlife, always showed evidence of use, always explained their purpose through inscriptions or artifacts. These chambers explained nothing, suggested something beyond conventional burial practice. The eastern corridor, blocked by the 15-ton sarcophagus, presented the most intriguing mystery. Why block a passage with such massive effort? Why position a granite box awkwardly, forcefully, in a space too narrow to properly accommodate it? The answer emerged from understanding the corridor's direction. It pointed east toward the Sphinx, toward the location where radar had detected the anomaly in 1993, toward where Edgar Cayce predicted the Hall of Records existed. The block passage was not preventing access from above. It was preventing access from below, ensuring that even if someone discovered the Osiris Shaft and descended to the second level, they could not follow the tunnel to what lay beneath the Sphinx. The ancient builders knew the shaft might be found. So they sealed the crucial connection, protecting what mattered most. The hydraulic system maintaining the underground lake at the third level demonstrated engineering sophistication that modern experts struggle to explain. Water at that depth, 90 feet below the surface, should simply flood any chamber carved below the water table. Ancient Egyptians supposedly lacked pumps or drainage technology to keep such spaces dry. Yet the Osiris Shaft chambers remained accessible, with water maintained at specific levels through channels carved into bedrock. The system functioned perfectly after thousands of years without maintenance, without power, without any visible mechanism controlling flow. This was not primitive construction. This was advanced hydrology, understanding of pressure and flow dynamics, implementation of principles that modern engineers study in university. The granite sarcophagi themselves posed engineering questions that remain unanswered. Granite from Aswan quarries, transported 800 kilometers by boat and sledge, then lowered through narrow vertical shafts barely wider than the boxes themselves. Modern engineers examining the shaft dimensions and sarcophagi measurements noted margins of only centimeters. Any miscalculation, any loss of control during lowering, would result in the 15-ton box jamming in the shaft permanently, blocking all further access, rendering years of excavation work useless. Yet the ancient builders successfully placed not one but 3 massive sarcophagi in precise positions, all without modern cranes or hydraulic equipment, all using supposedly primitive technology. Christopher Dunn, a precision engineer who has studied Egyptian stonework for decades, examined photographs of the Osiris Shaft sarcophagi and noted details that suggested manufacturing capabilities exceeding ancient Bronze Age technology. The internal corners were perfectly square, requiring precision tools. The walls were uniformly thick, indicating controlled cutting depth. The surfaces were polished smooth, demanding abrasives and techniques that standard Egyptology claims did not exist. Dunn's analysis suggested the sarcophagi were not laboriously hand-carved over months but precisely machined using methods we associate with industrial manufacturing. This interpretation remains controversial, dismissed by mainstream archaeology as impossible. But the physical evidence supports it. The boxes exhibit precision that hand tools cannot achieve, symmetry that requires measurement instruments, surfaces that demand mechanical polishing. The empty interiors of all 3 sarcophagi force reconsideration of their purpose. Standard archaeology assumes they were intended for burial but robbed in antiquity. But this explanation fails upon examination. The chambers were sealed, intact, undisturbed when Hawassa's team entered. No evidence of robbery. No damage to lids. No signs of forced entry. The sarcophagi were sealed empty, deliberately, as part of original construction. They were not burial containers. They were something else, serving functions that conventional archaeology has not considered. Alternative interpretations range from ritual immersion chambers to acoustic resonators to symbolic representations of cosmic principles. Without inscriptions or texts explaining their purpose, all interpretations remain speculative. But one thing is certain, these were not coffins. The island in the underground lake, with its 4 pillars marking cardinal directions, replicated the Egyptian creation myth, with precision too exact to be coincidental. In the beginning, according to Egyptian cosmology, the primordial waters of Nun covered everything. Then the Ben-Ben, the first land, emerged from the waters. The gods stood on this island and brought order from chaos, separating earth from sky, creating the world as humans know it. The Osiris Shaft recreates this myth physically, places an actual island in actual waters deep beneath the earth. The symbolism is unmistakable. But was it only symbolic? Or was this chamber used for ceremonies that reenacted creation, initiations that transformed participants through symbolic death and rebirth, rituals that connected initiates to the divine through carefully engineered spiritual experiences? Ancient mystery schools throughout the Mediterranean practiced initiation ceremonies involving sensory deprivation, symbolic burial, and ceremonial rebirth. Candidates were placed in dark chambers, sometimes submerged in water, subjected to psychological experiences designed to break down ordinary consciousness and allow spiritual transformation. The Greek Eleusinian mysteries, the Roman cult of Mithras, the Egyptian Isis mysteries, all used variations of this pattern. What if the Osiris Shaft was one such initiation chamber? What if the empty sarcophagi were immersion tanks, where initiates underwent symbolic death? What if the underground lake represented the waters of none from which the initiated emerged reborn? This interpretation explains features that burial theory cannot: the elaborate engineering, the empty boxes, the careful preservation of water levels, the complete absence of inscriptions that might reveal secrets to the uninitiated. The name Osiris Shaft takes on new meaning in this context. Osiris was the god of death and rebirth, the deity who died and was resurrected, who ruled the underworld and granted eternal life to worthy souls. His mythology centers on transformation, on death leading to new life, on initiation into mysteries that transcend mortal understanding. Naming the shaft after Osiris was not arbitrary. It identified the site's function, encoded its purpose in a name that initiated would understand, while outsiders interpreted as simple religious devotion. The shaft was the domain of Osiris not because he was buried there but because initiation ceremonies conducted there enacted his death and resurrection, allowed participants to experience symbolically what Osiris experienced mythologically. If this interpretation is correct, then the blocked Eastern Passage makes even more sense. Initiates would be brought to the Osiris Shaft through surface entrances, would descend through the levels as part of their ceremonial journey, would undergo experiences at each depth that prepared them for final revelation. But the hall beneath the Sphinx, where the most profound secrets were kept, would not be accessed through the initiation shaft. That would be reached through separate, more restricted passages, reserved for those who had completed all preparations, who had proven worthy through tests and trials, who had demonstrated they could be trusted with ultimate knowledge. The blocked passage ensured that initiation and revelation remained separate, that experiencing the Osiris ceremony did not automatically grant access to the Hall of Records. This understanding of underground Giza as an integrated mystery school complex rather than scattered burial chambers explains patterns that conventional archaeology cannot address. It explains why chambers lack inscriptions, initiates took oaths of secrecy, revealing mysteries through writing would violate fundamental principles. It explains the elaborate engineering, creating authentic spiritual experiences required precisely controlled environments. It explains the empty sarcophagi, they were tools of transformation, not containers for corpses. It explains the water systems, ritual purity required immersion in sacred waters maintained at specific conditions. It explains the blocked passages, different levels of initiation access different chambers, with final mysteries protected from those not yet ready. Ancient texts support this interpretation. The Egyptian Book of the Dead describes journeys through the duat, through chambers and gates where the deceased encounters tests and challenges before reaching final judgment. Standard interpretation treats this as afterlife mythology. But what if the Book of the Dead was an initiation manual, describing physical locations and actual ceremonies that initiates experienced? The Hall of Two Truths where Osiris judges the soul becomes an actual chamber. The weighing of the heart against the feather of Marat becomes an actual ritual. The gates guarded by beings with animal heads become actual checkpoints controlled by priests wearing ceremonial masks. The text preserves the sequence and structure of mystery school initiation, encoded as afterlife journey, hidden in plain sight for thousands of years. Plato's account of his journey to Egypt gains new significance in this context. He traveled there seeking wisdom from Egyptian priests, spent time studying their knowledge systems, learned mathematics and philosophy that influenced his later teachings. But he never fully revealed what he learned, never disclosed the deepest mysteries, maintained secrecy about certain teachings throughout his life. His writings hint at knowledge he possessed but could not share, at truths too profound or dangerous for public disclosure. Was Plato initiated into the mysteries of Giza? Did he descend into the chambers beneath the plateau? Did he experience what ancient initiates experienced, returning to Greece with knowledge that shaped Western philosophy but could never be explicitly stated? The connection between ancient mystery schools and modern Freemasonry suggests that some knowledge from these initiations survived, passed down through secret societies that maintain traditions across millennia. Masonic rituals include symbolic death and rebirth, advancement through degrees requiring proof of worthiness, oaths of secrecy protecting sacred knowledge. These patterns mirror ancient Egyptian practices, preserve structural elements even if specific content was lost or transformed. Masonic legends speak of ancient wisdom preserved from before the flood, of lost temples that will one day be rediscovered, of knowledge waiting for the time when humanity is ready to reclaim it. Are these just symbolic stories? Or are they encoded memories of actual places, actual knowledge, actual mysteries hidden beneath Giza? The modern suppression of exploration beneath Giza takes on new dimension when viewed through this lens. Authorities are not just protecting archaeological sites or preventing damage to monuments. They are maintaining ancient secrets, fulfilling obligations that extend back thousands of years, continuing the work of protecting mysteries from the uninitiated. The priests who spoke to Herodotus understood this. They told him what they could, revealed enough to preserve the knowledge that underground chambers existed, but withheld the crucial details about content and purpose. Modern authorities follow the same pattern, acknowledge that structures exist while preventing investigation that might reveal their function, maintain surface narrative while protecting deeper truth. This protection serves legitimate purpose if underground chambers contain knowledge that could be misused, technologies that could be weaponized, insights that could destabilize societies not prepared to integrate them. Ancient wisdom often came with warnings about premature disclosure, about revealing secrets to those lacking proper preparation, about the dangers of power without wisdom. If the Hall of Records contains what Cayce described, if Atlantean knowledge survived and was preserved by Egyptian initiates, if technologies from a lost civilization wait beneath the Sphinx, then perhaps those protecting these secrets are acting responsibly, preventing discoveries that humanity is not yet ready to manage safely. But this paternalistic perspective assumes that authorities possess wisdom that the public lacks, that some people have right to decide what others can know, that secrecy serves greater good than transparency. These assumptions deserve challenge. Who decides when humanity is ready? What gives anyone authority to withhold knowledge from the species as a whole? What if the secrets, whatever they are, could solve problems we currently face, could provide insights that advance civilization, could answer questions that haunt human existence? The cost of continued secrecy may exceed the risks of revelation. And the decision to maintain that secrecy should not rest with a few individuals but should involve democratic processes, public debate, transparent evaluation of competing values. The question of what technology could have created underground structures as extensive as the Italian team describes demands examination of physical evidence rather than speculation. When archaeologists study ancient construction sites, they look for tool marks on stone, for debris from quarrying and carving, for waste material that accumulates during any building project. The Osiris Shaft and other underground chambers at Giza show tool marks that experts have struggled to explain using conventional models of ancient Egyptian capabilities. The walls are not roughly hewn with bronze chisels and stone hammers. They are smoothly finished, precisely angled, uniformly carved in ways that suggest controlled cutting rather than laborious chipping. Christopher Dunn's analysis of tool marks in Egyptian underground chambers identified patterns inconsistent with hand tools. Parallel grooves running in perfectly straight lines across granite surfaces. Drill holes showing spiral patterns that indicate rotational speeds impossible to achieve with bow drills. Internal corners in sarcophagi cut to 90-degree precision requiring tools that can maintain angle while cutting through one of Earth's hardest stones. These observations, documented photographically and published in engineering journals, suggest manufacturing methods more sophisticated than Bronze Age technology. Dunn proposed that ancient Egyptians possessed advanced machining capabilities, perhaps using ultrasonic drilling or other techniques that leave signatures matching what he observed. Mainstream archaeology dismisses such proposals as impossible, pointing out that no evidence exists for ancient power tools, no machinery has been discovered, no texts describe mechanical devices capable of precision stone cutting. This absence of evidence argument assumes that all ancient technology would be preserved and discoverable, that nothing could be lost completely, that what we have not found could not have existed. But this assumption fails when applied to organic materials, to wooden components that would decay, to technologies using perishable elements that leave no archaeological trace. A sophisticated wooden lathe or mechanical drilling apparatus would vanish completely within centuries, leaving only the stone it worked as evidence of its existence. The precision of underground chambers suggests not just advanced tools but sophisticated surveying and engineering knowledge. The Osiris Shaft descends 90 feet through multiple levels, with each level precisely aligned, with passages connecting, at exact angles, with water channels maintaining specific gradients for flow control. Ancient surveyors had to calculate depths, angles, and positions without modern instruments, without laser levels or GPS systems, without computer-aided design. Yet they achieved accuracy that modern engineers respect, that demonstrates understanding of geometry and measurement far beyond what conventional history attributes to ancient civilizations. The transportation problem compounds the engineering mystery. Moving 15-ton granite sarcophagi from Aswan to Giza required boats capable of carrying massive loads, river transportation systems that could handle such weights, loading and unloading facilities at both ends. Then came overland transport from the Nile to the plateau, presumably using wooden sledges and rope, though experiments attempting to replicate this process have struggled to achieve the necessary control and precision. And finally, lowering these massive boxes down narrow vertical shafts without modern cranes or hydraulic equipment. Each step challenges our assumptions about ancient capabilities, forces reconsideration of what was possible with supposedly primitive technology. The empty sarcophagi add another dimension to the technology question. If these boxes were not meant to hold bodies, what function required such massive, precisely manufactured containers? Some researchers have proposed acoustic purposes, suggesting the sarcophagi were designed to resonate at specific frequencies, to amplify sound, in ways that created psychological effects on participants in ceremonies conducted within the chambers. Experiments testing this hypothesis have found that the dimensions and materials of similar sarcophagi do produce unusual acoustic properties, do amplify certain frequency ranges, do create standing waves that participants would experience physically. This suggests the ancient engineers understood acoustics, designed structures to manipulate sound, used physics for purposes beyond simple construction. Others have proposed that the sarcophagi functioned as containers for ritual immersion, that initiates were placed inside and surrounded by water or other liquids as part of sensory deprivation experiences. The watertight construction, the smooth interiors, the careful sealing would serve this purpose effectively. Medical research on sensory deprivation has demonstrated that isolation in dark, quiet environments produces altered states of consciousness, that reducing external stimuli allows internal experiences to emerge, that such practices can trigger profound psychological transformations. If ancient mystery schools understood these principles, if they designed underground chambers to facilitate such experiences, the elaborate engineering makes sense. You cannot create reliable initiation experiences without precise environmental control, without chambers that maintain specific conditions, without equipment that functions predictably across centuries. The hydraulic systems maintaining water levels in the Osiris Shaft represent perhaps the most impressive technical achievement. Modern engineers examining the design have noted that maintaining stable water levels below the water table requires either constant pumping or extremely sophisticated passive systems using pressure differentials and careful channel design. The ancient system uses the latter approach, channels that allow water to enter but control flow rate, that create equilibrium between inflow and outflow, that maintain stable levels without mechanical assistance. This requires understanding of fluid dynamics, of pressure relationships, of how water behaves in confined underground spaces. It requires testing and refinement, trial and error over extended periods, accumulation of knowledge across generations, of engineers who perfected techniques through careful observation and experimentation. Where did this knowledge come from? Standard Egyptology traces the development of Egyptian civilization from primitive Neolithic settlements through gradual advancement in agricultural technology, social organization, and construction techniques. This gradualist model assumes steady progress, with each generation building incrementally on previous achievements. But the underground chambers at Giza do not fit this pattern. They do not show experimental phases or evolutionary development. They demonstrate fully mature engineering capability appearing without obvious precursors, without the trial and error that should precede such accomplishment. This suggests either that earlier development remains undiscovered, or that knowledge came from sources conventional history has not recognized. The Zep-Tepi tradition in Egyptian texts refers to the first time when gods walked among humans and taught civilizations foundational knowledge. Mainstream scholarship interprets this as mythological, as religious stories explaining cultural origins. But what if these texts preserve actual historical memory? What if an earlier civilization, more advanced than the Neolithic cultures of the period, taught selected groups the engineering principles used in underground construction? This civilization need not have been supernatural or alien. It could have been a human culture that developed advanced knowledge during the previous interglacial period, that survived climate catastrophe in reduced numbers, that passed on crucial knowledge to emerging civilizations of the Holocene. Graham Hancock's research into global flood myths and ancient cataclysm narratives supports this interpretation. Nearly every ancient culture preserves stories of a time before the current age, of advanced civilizations destroyed by flood or other catastrophe, of survivors who preserved knowledge and taught it to those who came after. Egyptian texts mention the followers of Horus, initiates who maintained ancient wisdom across generations. Greek texts describe Atlantis, a civilization destroyed by natural disaster but whose knowledge survived through refugees. Indian texts describe cycles of civilization rising and falling across vast time spans. Chinese traditions speak of legendary emperors who taught technology and agriculture. These separate traditions from geographically distant cultures suggest a common source, a shared memory, of actual historical events encoded in mythology. If such a precursor civilization existed, if its survivors taught selected groups advanced engineering knowledge, underground Giza would be a logical place to preserve that knowledge. Surface structures are vulnerable to conquest, to natural disaster, to the ravages of time. But chambers carved deep into bedrock, protected by water barriers and sealed passages, can survive indefinitely. The knowledge could be encoded in text stored in the Hall of Records, could be demonstrated in the architecture itself, could be preserved in ceremonial practices maintained by initiated priesthoods. Each generation would add to the accumulation, would refine understanding, would ensure transmission to worthy successors. This system could maintain knowledge across thousands of years, surviving political changes and cultural transformations that obliterated surface civilizations. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis provides possible mechanism for the catastrophe that these traditions describe. Between 12,900 and 11,600 years ago, Earth experienced rapid climate change, with temperatures plunging, ice sheets advancing, and ecosystems collapsing worldwide. Recent research has identified evidence of cosmic impacts during this period, with airburst explosions scattering debris across continents, triggering wildfires, causing sudden climate shifts. A civilization existing during the period before these impacts could have achieved considerable advancement during the previous warm phase, only to be devastated by cosmic catastrophe. Survivors would preserve what knowledge they could, would seek ways to ensure it survived future catastrophes, would establish systems like underground Giza to protect the most crucial information. This interpretation remains speculative, depending on evidence that mainstream archaeology does not accept, on theories that challenge established chronologies, on possibilities that peer review tends to reject. But it explains patterns that conventional models struggle with. It explains the sudden appearance of advanced engineering at Giza. It explains why underground chambers seem designed for knowledge preservation. It explains the elaborate protection systems preventing casual access. It explains why authorities resist investigation if they understand that revelation would validate alternative histories that orthodox scholarship has rejected. The underground structures are not just ancient construction. They are libraries, time capsules, messages from a civilization we have forgotten, waiting for the moment when we are ready to remember. The technology question ultimately connects to the purpose question. Why build so extensively underground? Why invest resources equivalent to constructing multiple pyramids into chambers that most people would never see? The answer must involve purpose that transcends surface monuments, that requires concealment, that benefits from protection that only deep burial provides. Knowledge preservation fits these requirements. So do initiation ceremonies requiring specific controlled environments. So do technologies that must be protected from misuse or loss. The underground chambers served multiple purposes, were part of integrated system designed to preserve, protect, and transmit the most valuable achievements of ancient wisdom across time spans that would see surface civilizations rise and fall. The possibility that ancient Giza represents inherited knowledge from a pre-dynastic civilization requires examining evidence that conventional chronology has difficulty explaining. The Sphinx weathering patterns analyzed by Dr. Robert Schoch represent the most compelling geological evidence. Water erosion cutting deep vertical channels into the Sphinx enclosure could only result from prolonged rainfall, the kind of precipitation that ceased in Egypt around 8000 BC when the Sahara began its transformation from savanna to desert. If the Sphinx was carved during the period when such rainfall occurred, it predates Egyptian dynastic civilization by thousands of years. This conclusion contradicts accepted chronology but aligns with geological evidence. The implications extend beyond the Sphinx itself. If a civilization capable of monumental stone carving existed in the region before 8000 BC, during the period when North Africa was green and habitable, what else might they have built? The underground structures could represent their primary achievement, the visible pyramids merely later additions constructed by dynastic Egyptians who discovered these ancient chambers and built surface monuments to mark and protect them. This interpretation explains why underground engineering seems more sophisticated than surface construction, why the chambers lack typical Egyptian inscriptions, why their purpose remains mysterious even after extensive study. They were not built by the civilization we know as ancient Egypt. They were inherited from predecessors we have not yet recognized. Ancient Egyptian texts support this possibility through references to the Zep Tepi, the first time when gods walked the earth and established the foundations of civilization. The Turin King list and other chronological texts record not just historical pharaohs but mythical god-kings who ruled before human dynasties, whose reigns lasted impossibly long periods, whose accomplishments exceeded what humans could achieve. Conventional scholarship dismisses these as religious mythology, as symbolic rather than historical. But what if these texts preserve actual memories of an earlier civilization, recorded by later Egyptians who did not fully understand what they were documenting, who interpreted advanced predecessors as divine beings because their capabilities seemed superhuman? The followers of Horus mentioned in Egyptian texts represent another intriguing connection. These were priests and initiates who maintained ancient knowledge across generations, who served as cultural continuity during transitions between dynasties, who possessed wisdom that ordinary people could not access. They were not political rulers but knowledge keepers, preserving traditions and techniques that predated their own era. If a pre-dynastic civilization collapsed due to climate change or catastrophe, survivors with crucial knowledge could have established such priesthoods, could have trained successive generations to maintain what remained, could have created institutional structures that outlasted any individual or dynasty. The Edfu building texts, inscribed on temple walls during the Ptolemaic period but claiming to record far more ancient information, describe the creation of sacred spaces by gods in primordial times. These texts mention the island of creation, a place that emerged from primordial waters where the first temples were built. The parallels to the Osiris Shaft are striking. An island in underground waters, precisely aligned pillars marking sacred space, chambers serving purposes beyond simple burial. The Edfu texts may be describing actual places that later Egyptians knew existed but could not fully explain, encoding historical reality in religious language because that was the only vocabulary available for discussing such ancient wonders. Global flood myths add context to this interpretation. Nearly every ancient culture preserves stories of catastrophic flooding that destroyed previous civilizations, of survivors who preserved knowledge and rebuilt, of a time before the current age when the world was different. The Sumerian king list describes antediluvian monarchs who ruled before the Great Flood. Biblical tradition records Noah preserving life and knowledge through the deluge. Greek tradition describes Deucalion surviving flood sent by Zeus. Hindu texts describe cyclical destructions and renewals of civilization. These separate traditions from distant cultures suggest shared memory of actual catastrophic events that disrupted human societies globally. The Younger Dryas climate disruption, occurring between 12,900 and 11,600 years ago, provides geological and climatological evidence for such catastrophe. The period saw rapid temperature drops, massive ice sheet expansion, extinction of megafauna, and collapse of Clovis culture in North America. Recent research has identified evidence of cosmic impacts during this period, with airbursts scattering debris across multiple continents, triggering wildfires, causing sudden environmental changes. A civilization existing before these impacts could have achieved considerable advancement during the preceding warm period, only to be devastated by cosmic catastrophe and resulting climate chaos. If such a civilization existed in North Africa during the pre-Younger Dryas period when the Sahara was green and habitable, if they built underground structures at Giza to preserve their knowledge, if they trained survivors to maintain and protect these chambers across millennia, then much of what seems mysterious about ancient Egypt becomes explicable. The sudden appearance of sophisticated engineering, the underground chambers serving unclear purposes, the elaborate protection systems, the textual references to gods and primordial times, all make sense as remnants of inherited wisdom from predecessors whose full story was lost but whose achievements survived. The Sphinx becomes the marker, carved during the Green Sahara period to identify the location of underground knowledge repositories, weathered by thousands of years of rainfall before dynastic Egyptians arrived and began their own construction. The pyramids become later additions, built by pharaohs who knew something precious lay beneath, who constructed massive monuments to prevent the underground chambers from being forgotten, who established priesthoods to maintain access control across generations. The Osiris Shaft becomes one node in a larger network, a controlled access point to deeper mysteries that only fully initiated priests could enter. This narrative is speculative, combining evidence from multiple disciplines in ways that conventional scholarship rejects. But it explains patterns that orthodox interpretation struggles with. It provides context for why underground Giza seems technologically advanced beyond what Bronze Age civilization should achieve. It explains why authorities resist investigation if they understand that discovery would validate historical narratives that academia has systematically rejected. It explains why ancient texts consistently reference lost knowledge, primordial wisdom, teachings from before the flood. These are not just myths. They are cultural memories of actual events, preserved across millennia by societies that understood something important had been lost and must not be completely forgotten. The alternative interpretation, that dynastic Egyptians of 2500 BC independently developed all the engineering sophistication visible in underground Giza using only copper tools and primitive methods, requires accepting that capabilities appeared suddenly without developmental phases, that knowledge emerged without clear sources, that purposes remain mysterious because we have somehow misunderstood civilization we have studied for centuries. This explanation works if we assume our understanding of ancient capabilities is approximately correct, if we trust that absence of evidence for earlier advanced civilization means such civilization did not exist, if we believe that mainstream archaeology has correctly interpreted all available data. But what if these assumptions are wrong? What if our understanding of ancient capabilities is incomplete because we have not recognized evidence for knowledge transfer from earlier civilizations? What if absence of evidence reflects only that we have not looked in the right places or asked the right questions? What if mainstream archaeology has systematically dismissed evidence that contradicts established chronology because academic institutions resist paradigm changes that would invalidate decades of published research and teaching? These possibilities deserve consideration when physical evidence, ancient texts, and global traditions all point toward conclusions that orthodox interpretation rejects. The technology question ultimately cannot be separated from the chronology question. If underground Giza was built when conventional chronology claims, we must explain sophisticated engineering using Bronze Age technology. If it was built earlier, during a period when we assume only hunter-gatherers existed, we must explain how such civilization could exist without leaving more obvious traces. Either option challenges established narratives. Either option requires reconsidering what we think we know. And this requirement makes authorities uncomfortable, makes institutions defensive, makes revelation politically dangerous regardless of what truth the evidence supports. The chambers beneath Giza wait in darkness, containing whatever knowledge or artifacts or architectural evidence they contain, accessible only to those with official authorization, protected by policies that have remained consistent across generations of Egyptian governments. Whether they contain Atlantean records as Cayce claimed, whether they preserve knowledge from a pre-Younger Dryas civilization as alternative researchers propose, whether they simply represent dynastic Egyptian construction we have not yet properly understood, can only be determined through investigation that authorities continue to prevent. The technology exists to explore these spaces without damage, to document whatever they contain without disturbing original conditions, to answer questions that have persisted for thousands of years. The only obstacle is political will, the only barrier is institutional resistance, the only challenge is overcoming the fear of what discovery might reveal about human history and the narratives we have constructed to explain it. The reasons authorities resist investigation of underground Giza are more complex than simple academic stubbornness or institutional inertia. Multiple layers of concern intersect, creating a web of motivations that ensure continued secrecy regardless of which individuals hold power. Understanding these motivations requires examining the political, religious, economic, and intellectual forces that all converge on the same conclusion: the chambers must remain sealed, the questions must remain unanswered, and the narrative must remain controlled. The academic concern is perhaps most obvious. Egyptology as a discipline has spent over 2 centuries developing a comprehensive narrative of ancient Egyptian civilization. Thousands of scholars have built careers on this foundation. Textbooks codify the chronology. Museums organize collections according to accepted interpretation. University departments structure curricula around established understanding. If underground Giza contains evidence that fundamentally challenges this narrative, if discovery proves that core assumptions were wrong, the professional consequences would be devastating. Entire research programs would require revision. Published works would become obsolete. Careers built on now invalidated theories would lose credibility. The institutional cost of admitting such fundamental error exceeds what academic structures can easily absorb. Dr. Zahi Hawass embodies this academic investment. He built a career defending conventional Egyptology, attacking alternative interpretations, positioning himself as the guardian of proper scholarship against fringe speculation. His authority derives from his role as defender of orthodox interpretation. If excavation beneath Giza proved that alternative researchers were correct about underground cities or pre-dynastic civilizations, Hawass's entire professional legacy would be undermined. Every dismissal he issued, every critic he denounced, every claim he rejected would be revealed as premature judgment. This personal stake makes objective evaluation impossible. Hawass cannot allow investigation that might vindicate those he has spent decades discrediting. Religious concerns add another dimension. Egypt is a predominantly Muslim nation where religious authorities wield significant influence. Islamic tradition includes specific narratives about human history, about the timeline of civilization, about the relationship between divine revelation and human development. Discovery of advanced pre-Islamic civilizations, particularly ones that might predate Quranic accounts of human origins, creates theological complications. Religious scholars would face questions about how such findings reconcile with traditional interpretation. Fundamentalist factions might view archaeological revelations as challenges to faith. The government, dependent on religious legitimacy, cannot ignore these concerns. Preventing discoveries that create religious controversy becomes a political necessity. The economic dimension involves Egypt's tourism industry, which generates billions of dollars annually and employs millions of people. This industry depends on a clear, compelling narrative that tourists can easily understand. The pyramids are tombs of ancient kings. The Sphinx guards the necropolis. The monuments represent the pinnacle of ancient achievement. This story works. Tourists comprehend it, pay to experience it, return home satisfied with their understanding. Complicating this narrative with underground cities, pre-dynastic civilizations, mysterious chambers serving unclear purposes would confuse rather than enlighten. Confusion reduces tourist satisfaction. Reduced satisfaction threatens the industry. Therefore, maintaining the simple narrative becomes an economic imperative that transcends archaeological accuracy. National pride compounds these concerns. Egyptian identity draws heavily from pharaonic heritage. The pyramids represent national achievement, proof that Egyptian civilization was among humanity's greatest accomplishments. Alternative theories suggesting that underground structures predate dynastic Egypt, or that knowledge was inherited from earlier civilizations, dilute this national pride. They imply that what Egyptians built was less original, less impressive, less uniquely Egyptian than the preferred narrative claims. Government officials who allow such implications to be validated through excavation risk accusations of betraying national heritage, of collaborating with foreigners who seek to diminish Egyptian accomplishments. This political risk makes approval of controversial excavations career-threatening for officials regardless of scientific merit. International political considerations also play a role. Western institutions, particularly universities and museums that built collections through colonial-era acquisitions, have vested interest in maintaining conventional chronology. If underground Giza reveals evidence that fundamentally revises understanding of ancient civilization, questions arise about whether Western scholarship properly interpreted Egyptian culture, whether colonial-era archaeology was conducted competently, whether institutions built on that scholarship remain credible. These questions threaten not just Egyptology but the broader structure of Western academic authority over archaeological interpretation. Powerful institutions in the United States and Europe therefore indirectly support Egyptian resistance to investigation, preferring continued mystery to discoveries that might undermine established academic hierarchies. The possibility that underground chambers contain knowledge or technologies that modern society is not prepared to handle provides another level of concern. If Edgar Cayce was correct about Atlantean records, if ancient texts preserve knowledge about advanced capabilities that were lost during prehistoric catastrophe, revelation could destabilize current technological and social structures. Knowledge of energy systems different from fossil fuels could disrupt global economies. Understanding of consciousness or spirituality that contradicts materialist paradigms could challenge scientific authority. Discovery of evidence that human civilization is far older and more cyclical than currently believed could undermine confidence in progress narratives that shape modern culture. These possibilities, however speculative, create legitimate concern among those who consider themselves responsible for social stability. The pattern of people who disappeared or were silenced after discovering too much adds an element of fear to the suppression. Whether these incidents involved actual harm or merely professional destruction, they create atmosphere where researchers understand that pursuing certain questions carries serious consequences. This chilling effect does not require active conspiracy. It emerges naturally from a system where institutional interests align, where powerful individuals protect their authority, where economic and political forces all point toward maintaining secrecy. Researchers who want continued access to sites, who need permits and funding, who hope for academic positions, learn quickly which questions are acceptable and which are career-ending. The Egyptian government's announcement of its own survey to verify the Italian findings represents this dynamic perfectly. By conducting their own investigation, authorities appear responsive and scientific. But by controlling who conducts the survey, what methodology they use, how results are interpreted, and, when findings are released, they ensure that even if anomalies are detected, the interpretation will support rather than challenge official narratives. The delay in releasing results suggests that what they found did not fit expected patterns, that internal debates are occurring about how to present findings without triggering the various concerns outlined above. The solution will likely involve acknowledging some underground features while minimizing their significance, explaining them through conventional frameworks, and denying permission for the kind of thorough excavation that would definitively settle the question. This multi-layered resistance makes breakthrough difficult but not impossible. Technology continues advancing. Public interest continues growing. Independent researchers continue gathering evidence. At some point, the accumulation of data from remote sensing, the pressure from international scientific community, and the demand from public will exceed the capacity of Egyptian authorities to maintain complete control. But that point has not yet arrived. As of October 2025, the chambers remain sealed, the questions remain unanswered, and the forces resisting investigation remain stronger than the forces pushing for revelation. The future of underground Giza discovery depends on forces beyond archaeology, beyond Egyptian politics, beyond academic institutions. Technology is advancing faster than authorities can adapt their control mechanisms. Satellite imaging improves every year, with higher resolution, deeper penetration, more sophisticated processing algorithms. Artificial intelligence can detect patterns that human analysts miss, can correlate data from multiple sources, can identify anomalies that suggest artificial construction. These technologies do not require permission from Egyptian authorities. They operate from orbit, from international facilities, from independent research centers that answer to scientific curiosity rather than political convenience. Private organizations are increasingly interested in archaeological mysteries that official institutions ignore. Companies specializing in remote sensing technology see Giza as proving ground for their capabilities. Successfully mapping underground structures would demonstrate commercial applications for their systems, would generate publicity that governments cannot suppress, would establish precedents for investigating sites without requiring traditional excavation permits. These commercial interests align with public curiosity, creating market incentives for continued investigation regardless of official resistance. When profit motives and truth-seeking converge, institutional barriers become less effective. The internet and social media have fundamentally changed information dynamics. When the Italian team announced their findings in March 2025, the news spread globally within hours, reaching millions before Egyptian authorities could formulate response. YouTube videos explaining the discovery accumulated millions of views. Reddit discussions analyzed the evidence. Twitter debates engaged experts and enthusiasts. This distributed conversation cannot be controlled by any single authority, cannot be suppressed through traditional gatekeeping, cannot be erased once it enters collective consciousness. The questions are now public. The curiosity is activated. And that activation creates pressure that accumulates over time. Younger generations of Egyptians are less invested in maintaining narratives that served previous political purposes. Many young Egyptian archaeologists and scholars recognize that resistance to investigation damages credibility, that appearing to hide secrets generates more suspicion than revelation would create. They understand that transparent investigation, even if discoveries challenge conventional chronology, ultimately strengthens rather than weakens Egyptian heritage, by demonstrating commitment to truth over propaganda. As these younger professionals advance in their careers, as they gain positions of authority, the policies that have maintained secrecy for decades will face internal pressure for change. International scientific organizations are beginning to recognize that access to Egyptian sites should not be controlled solely by Egyptian authorities, particularly when those authorities systematically prevent investigation based on political rather than scientific criteria. UNESCO, which designates World Heritage Sites, has authority to require transparency and proper investigation as conditions for continued heritage status. If Egyptian resistance to underground investigation becomes recognized as obstruction of scientific knowledge rather than protection of heritage, international pressure could force policy changes. This diplomatic dimension remains underdeveloped but represents potential leverage point for those seeking investigation. The technological capability to excavate safely continues improving. Robotic systems can now navigate narrow passages, can operate in flooded environments, can document with precision that exceeds human capabilities. These systems reduce the risk argument that authorities use to justify preventing investigation. If robots can explore without endangering people or damaging structures, the safety rationale collapses. Automated systems can maintain sterile protocols, can preserve archaeological context, can document discoveries in ways that satisfy even the most demanding scholarly requirements. As this technology becomes more accessible and affordable, the barriers to investigation become increasingly arbitrary rather than practical. Climate change may force the issue in unexpected ways. Rising temperatures, changing precipitation patterns, and increasing frequency of extreme weather events threaten surface monuments and, potentially, underground chambers as well. If investigation reveals that water infiltration is damaging sealed chambers, if structural integrity is declining, if delay risks losing whatever the chambers contain, then preservation concerns that currently justify sealing could flip to justify opening. Authorities who resist investigation to protect heritage may find themselves accused of negligence if preventable damage occurs to chambers they refuse to examine. The generational timeline matters. Dr. Zahi Horace is in his late 70s. The academic generation that built careers defending conventional chronology is aging out of positions of authority. Within the next decade, leadership in Egyptian archaeology will transition to scholars who came of age in the Internet era, who are accustomed to open information, who are less invested in defending interpretations established before they entered the field. This generational transition creates opportunity for policy change, for approaches that value discovery over maintenance of established narratives. Public pressure will continue building. The 2025 Italian announcement reached mainstream consciousness in ways that previous claims did not. Millions of people now know that researchers claim to have detected massive underground structures at Giza. Millions are aware that Egyptian authorities deny these claims without conducting verifiable investigation. This awareness creates constituency for transparency, for proper scientific inquiry, for resolution of questions that affect human understanding of our own history. Politicians in democratic societies respond to constituent interests. While Egypt is not a democracy, its government still responds to public opinion, particularly regarding issues that attract international attention. The chambers themselves remain unchanged by these developments. Whatever they contain continues waiting in darkness, unaffected by debates about whether they should be opened, undisturbed by political calculations about timing and revelation. The stone does not care about academic careers or religious sensitivities or economic concerns. The water maintains its levels through hydraulic systems that have functioned for millennia. The sarcophagi sit empty exactly as they were sealed. The blocked passages prevent access exactly as the ancient builders intended. The physical reality persists regardless of human reluctance to acknowledge it. When investigation finally occurs, when the chambers are properly explored and documented, when whatever they contain is revealed, the world will face questions that have waited thousands of years for answers. Are these structures remnants of pre-dynastic civilization, evidence of knowledge inherited from predecessors we have not recognized? Do they contain records that validate ancient texts dismissed as mythology? Do they preserve technologies or insights that challenge our understanding of ancient capabilities? Or are they simply unusual examples of dynastic Egyptian construction that we have misinterpreted due to insufficient evidence? Any of these answers will be significant. Even if investigation confirms conventional interpretation, the fact of having properly examined the evidence will advance knowledge. But if investigation reveals evidence that challenges established chronology, that validates alternative theories, that demonstrates ancient civilizations were more sophisticated than acknowledged, the implications will reshape how we understand human history. We may discover that civilization is older than we believed, that knowledge has been lost and partially recovered multiple times, that the narrative of linear progress from primitive to advanced is oversimplified. These discoveries would not diminish modern achievements but would contextualize them within a longer and more complex story of human development. The answer to the question of what lies beneath Giza is waiting. Not in books, not in theories, not in debates between experts, but in the chambers themselves. The only way to know is to look. The only way to look is to overcome the political, academic, religious, and economic barriers that have prevented investigation. Those barriers are weakening. Technology is providing tools that bypass traditional controls. Public awareness is creating pressure that authorities cannot indefinitely resist. Generational change is bringing new perspectives to positions of power. The timing of revelation remains uncertain, but the direction is clear. The secret is ending. The truth, whatever it is, will emerge. And beneath our feet, in darkness that has lasted thousands of years, the chambers wait for light.